The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the bustling streets of downtown San Francisco, where Clint Eastwood, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, stepped out of his car and onto the pavement. At first glance, he looked like any other man walking down the street, nothing special about his appearance, nothing that would immediately give him away as one of the most famous figures in Hollywood history. He had chosen this moment for its quiet anonymity, the calm before the storm of the usual chaos that followed him in public spaces. He'd decided to take a break from the noise of his past life, and what better place to do that than a local car dealership? He had been eyeing a few models recently, and today was the day he'd finally decided to make a purchase. The place he'd chosen was small but well kept, nestled on a corner near the busy district. A family-owned business, it had a reputation for treating customers like people, not just commissions. Clint liked that. He had always preferred the quiet places, the ones where you could be yourself without the prying eyes of the world. This was going to be a simple errand, something easy and straightforward. As he walked inside the showroom, the bright fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sterile light on rows of gleaming new cars. The scent of fresh leather and cleaning products filled the air. Clint made his way toward a shiny black sedan at the front of the lot, admiring its sleek lines. He was already lost in thought, considering the practicality of the vehicle, when a voice broke through his reverie. "Hey there, sir. Looking for something to impress the wife, or are you just here to get the most bang for your buck?" Clint turned to see a young man approach him, his smile wide and confident, with a glint in his eyes that screamed ambition. The salesman was in his mid-20s, dressed in a sharp suit that looked a little too tight. His name tag read, Jack Miller. The guy had the kind of bravado that only came from thinking you had the upper hand, something Clint had encountered countless times in his career. He couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. "I'm just looking for something reliable," Clint replied, keeping his voice even. "Nothing too flashy." Jack didn't miss a beat. "Oh, I get it. You're probably trying to downplay the fact that you're rolling in cash, huh? Well, I get it. The rich always want to act humble, but don't worry, I can see through it. Let's get you something that screams understated luxury. You won't be disappointed." Clint blinked, taken aback for a moment. Was this guy serious? Did he really just assume that Clint was some rich guy slumming it in a cheap dealership? The audacity was almost comical. Jack, however, was already walking toward a row of expensive vehicles, clearly expecting Clint to follow. Clint paused for a moment. He could have corrected Jack, but he didn't. Maybe it was his age, maybe it was the constant barrage of misunderstandings throughout his life, but Clint had learned that sometimes silence spoke louder than words. This could be a lesson for the young man. "I'll take a look at the sedan," Clint said, his voice measured, still not giving anything away. He turned back to the car in front of him, appreciating the simple elegance it exuded. Jack, however, was relentless. He turned around, his voice a bit louder now, eager to seal the deal. "You know, I've got to admit, I don't know why anyone would go for a sedan these days. It's almost like buying a car that screams I'm past my prime, you know. It's just, well, it's just kind of boring. Now, if you want to show off to the world, a nice sports car would do the trick. You can't go wrong with a Mustang, right? It's got style, speed, and power." Clint could feel the temperature in the room rise. Jack's words were starting to get under his skin, but Clint kept his face neutral. He had seen a million salespeople like this in his life, people who were so sure of themselves they'd cut you down just to make a quick sale. And now, in the silence of the showroom, the ridiculousness of the situation began to settle in. Here was this young, cocky guy, standing in front of one of Hollywood's most recognizable stars, and all Clint had done was quietly ask about a car. But that wasn't the worst part. Jack didn't know who he was talking to. Clint felt the weight of his anonymity in that moment. People had always treated him as if he were larger than life, too famous to be ordinary, too iconic to blend in. But today, Clint was just another man on the street, just another guy looking for a car. Yet, somehow, he found himself in a conversation with a salesman who seemed completely unaware of who he was. "I think I'm good," Clint said, his voice flat, cutting through the awkward energy that had built up. "I'll stick with the sedan. But thanks for the recommendation." Jack's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Sure thing, sir. I'll have the keys ready for you in a sec." He flashed another grin, though it lacked the confidence of his earlier bravado. As Clint turned to inspect the sedan once more, he felt a strange mix of amusement and frustration. This was exactly the kind of encounter he had been hoping to avoid, another person who had no idea who he was, and was quick to judge based on superficial assumptions. But just as Clint was about to walk away, he heard Jack's voice again. "I gotta say, though, sir," Jack said, sounding more casual now. "If you're not looking to drop a bunch of cash on a car, maybe you should think twice. You really want to drive around in a car that looks like a rental? Just saying. Maybe it's time for an upgrade. You can't drive around in something that's just going to blend in with the crowd." Clint stopped in his tracks. For the first time, a bit of fire sparked in his chest. He was done being polite. He turned to face Jack, his eyes narrowing. "I think you've said enough," Clint said, his voice low and firm. Jack blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" Clint's eyes locked onto him. "You've been insulting me this whole time, and you don't even realize it. You don't know who I am, and frankly, that's fine. But I'm the one who's going to buy a car today. You're the one who's going to have to live with that." For a brief moment, Jack stood frozen, clearly trying to process Clint's words. The tension in the air was thick, and Clint could feel the shift happening in real time. Jack's bravado was gone, replaced by uncertainty. That's not how I meant it, sir," Jack stammered. "I'm just—" But Clint didn't let him finish. He turned, his back now to the salesman, and called out over his shoulder. "Get your manager. I think it's time we talked about a few things. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" Clint Eastwood wasn't the kind of man to bask in the glory of his past. Fame had never been something he sought, it had been thrust upon him. The spotlight, the flashing cameras, the crowds clamoring for his attention, they were all part of a life he had come to accept as a necessary evil. But today, as he walked through the doors of the dealership, his past felt like something distant. Something almost unreal. A world he had left behind. But even so, that world wasn't easily forgotten. Clint had made his name as a hard-as-nails cowboy, a tough-as-steel vigilante, and an all-around man of few words. His roles in iconic films like Dirty Harry and The Good, the Bad and the Ugly made him a household name, an eternal symbol of American masculinity. For years, he had been the face of quiet strength, the man who always knew what to say, or never said anything at all. That was the Clint everyone knew. The Clint who stared down the barrel of a gun without flinching, the Clint who could turn the tide of any battle with just a grimace. But behind the legendary persona, Clint was just a man who, like everyone else, carried his own scars. His early life had been one of struggle and uncertainty. Born to a working-class family in San Francisco, Clint had learned early on that life wasn't handed to you on a silver platter. You had to fight for what you wanted. His father was a steelworker, a tough, silent man who rarely showed affection but always worked hard to provide. His mother was kind but often distant, busy trying to hold the family together. Growing up, Clint had always felt like he was walking in the shadows of others. His older brother, in particular, had been the golden child, the one with the charisma, the one with the good looks. Clint had always been the quiet one, the one who preferred to stay in the background, lost in books or dreaming of faraway places. He'd often felt like an outsider, unsure of where he belonged. It wasn't until he enlisted in the U.S. Army during the Korean War that Clint began to find his place in the world. The military taught him discipline, toughness, and resilience. But it also showed him the fragility of life, the fleeting nature of existence. Those lessons stayed with him long after he left the army, helping to shape the man he would become. After returning home, Clint tried his hand at various jobs, from logging to working as a carpenter. But his real break came when he auditioned for a role in a small TV show called Rawhide. The role was minor, but it was enough to get him noticed. Soon, Hollywood began to take notice of the tall, brooding man with the deep voice. And before long, Clint Eastwood became a household name. But fame had its price. The spotlight was a constant companion, one that never let him go. The fame was intoxicating, but it also brought its own set of challenges. The constant media attention, the endless premieres and interviews, it all became overwhelming. Clint often found himself retreating into solitude, craving time away from the hustle and bustle of Hollywood. He preferred quiet, peaceful places, the kind where he could just be himself. In recent years, Clint had stepped away from acting and directing. He had long since grown tired of the glitz and glamour of the film industry. The world of Hollywood had given him everything, but it had also taken something from him, something that was hard to describe. It was as if, in giving so much to his career, he had lost a part of himself. That's why he was here, in this dealership, looking for a car. It was simple, unremarkable, and, for Clint, that was exactly what he needed. He wasn't looking for anything flashy or extravagant. He wasn't interested in drawing attention to himself. He just wanted a car that would get him from point A to point B, without all the fuss. But as Clint stood in the dealership, surveying the cars, he couldn't help but think about how strange it felt to be here. In his mind, this was just a small, insignificant moment in a life that had been filled with drama, action, and intensity. Yet, here he was, standing in a showroom filled with shiny new cars, trying to find a vehicle that suited him. It felt almost surreal, like he had somehow slipped into an entirely different life. As Clint stood there, pondering his options, his mind drifted back to his family. His relationship with his children had always been complicated. His son, Scott, had followed in his footsteps, becoming an actor in his own right. But Clint had always been a distant father, focused more on his career than on being there for his kids. He often regretted the time he had lost, the moments he couldn't get back. Scott, now in his 30s, had tried to connect with his father, but Clint's rigid, no-nonsense attitude had made it difficult. Clint had always struggled with vulnerability, unable to express the emotions that so many others could so easily share. He had grown up in a world where showing emotion was seen as a weakness, a trait that had no place in the harsh, unforgiving world of the movies. And so, Clint had retreated into himself. His relationships, while genuine, had always been strained by the walls he had built around himself. His personal life had always played second fiddle to his career. But now, with his acting career behind him, Clint found himself in a place where he could no longer hide from the things he had neglected for so long. As he stood in the dealership, it dawned on him that perhaps this was the beginning of something new. Maybe this car, this simple decision, was a step toward something greater. Maybe it was a chance to make things right, to reconnect with the people he had distanced himself from over the years. Maybe this was his moment of change. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and Clint turned to see Jack Miller approaching once again. This time, there was no cocky grin on the salesman's face. He looked nervous, unsure of what to say next. Clint raised an eyebrow, noting the shift in Jack's demeanor. He couldn't help but smirk inwardly. Jack had underestimated him, and now, he was paying the price. But Clint wasn't in the mood for confrontation. He had learned long ago that sometimes, silence was the most powerful weapon. "Can I help you with anything, sir?" Jack asked, his voice tentative. Clint nodded, giving the young man a look that held a quiet authority. "Yeah, I'll take a look at that sedan," he said, pointing to the car he had been eyeing earlier. I'm ready to make a decision. Jack nodded quickly, still visibly rattled by the earlier exchange. But Clint wasn't in the mood to make him suffer. He simply wanted to move on with his day. For once, he wasn't Clint Eastwood, the Hollywood legend. He was just a man buying a car. And for Clint, that felt strangely liberating. The evening had turned colder, and Clint could feel the shift in the air as he stood by the sleek black sedan, his hand resting on its cool hood. The soft hum of the dealership, once comforting, now felt distant. Jack's approach was hesitant, his earlier cocky swagger gone, replaced by an awkwardness that didn't go unnoticed by Clint. Clint's gaze never left the car. It was just a car, but in that moment, it represented more than that, a step forward, an attempt to regain a sense of normalcy after years of living in a whirlwind of celebrity. And yet, even with this calm sense of resolution, Clint couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here. Maybe it was the brief tension with Jack earlier, or maybe it was the strange sense of déjà vu that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Whatever it was, Clint couldn't ignore it. Jack cleared his throat, standing just a few feet away now. So, I'll go grab the paperwork, he said, his voice strained. The confidence from earlier had completely evaporated. Clint didn't respond immediately, taking a moment to consider the situation. The young salesman seemed genuinely uncomfortable. He wasn't just trying to push a car onto Clint anymore. This felt different, like he was trying to salvage something from the wreckage of the interaction. Jack's initial arrogance had left him in a vulnerable position, and Clint wasn't one to let someone flounder without offering a lifeline. Clint turned to face Jack, his expression neutral but firm. You know, you could have been a little more careful with what you said earlier. People don't always appreciate being judged like that. You made an assumption about me, and I'm sure you didn't mean it, but you've got to understand that not everyone in this world fits the mold you've got in your head. Jack's eyes widened, clearly surprised by Clint's directness. I didn't mean to offend you, he stammered, his posture tense. It's just. I've been trying so hard to hit my numbers, and sometimes I go a little too far to make a sale. He swallowed, trying to find the right words. I thought I could tell what kind of customer you were just by looking at you, but I was wrong. I didn't realize who you were. I didn't realize you'd been around, well, you know, a lot longer than I have. Clint studied Jack for a moment, a small flicker of sympathy passing through him. Jack was young, eager to succeed, yet clearly too eager for his own good. It was easy to see how someone could lose themselves in the game of sales, how you could lose sight of the people in front of you in favor of chasing the next commission, the next deal. He'd seen it 1,000 times, especially in Hollywood, where the chase for success could turn even the most grounded person into someone unrecognizable. Well, Jack, Clint said, his voice softer now, this world will humble you sooner or later, whether you're ready for it or not. You'll get one too many lessons in humility, and before you know it, you'll understand that it's not about who's got the most money or the flashiest car. It's about something deeper than that. He gave Jack a look, one that was almost fatherly, but with a weight that only experience could bring. Remember that. Jack nodded, his shoulders sagging a little as the weight of Clint's words settled in. I hear you, he muttered, before offering a sheepish smile. I guess I've got a lot to learn. Clint gave him a brief nod of approval. He could have pushed Jack further, given him a full lecture on humility and respect, but it didn't feel right. The young man would find his way in time. Clint knew that. All he could do was offer a few words of wisdom, hoping they would stick. Well, get that paperwork together, Jack. I'm ready to move forward with the deal, Clint said, turning back to the car. The sleek black sedan now felt like a beacon of quiet strength in his life, something simple, something he could count on. Jack gave a quick nod, clearly relieved that Clint wasn't angry. I'll be right back with everything, he said, his tone more respectful than it had been before. As Jack left, Clint couldn't help but reflect on the odd encounter. It wasn't like Clint had ever been in a situation like this before. Sure, he'd faced his fair share of difficult people, especially in the world of Hollywood, but a car salesman? This was a different kind of encounter altogether. And yet, somehow, it felt strangely familiar. He realized that he wasn't just dealing with a cocky salesman, he was seeing a younger version of himself, someone who had been too eager to prove himself, someone who had made mistakes along the way. Jack reminded him of the Clint Eastwood of old, the man who thought he knew everything, only to find out that he knew nothing at all. Clint sighed and ran a hand through his hair, looking out at the rows of cars once again. He could feel the years of experience weighing heavily on him, but there was a sense of peace that had settled in, too. Maybe, just maybe, this car, this simple decision, was more than just a transaction. Maybe it was a way for him to regain some control over a life that had been spinning out of his hands for far too long. Minutes later, Jack returned with the paperwork, his face now genuinely apologetic. He handed Clint the documents, trying to make up for his earlier mistakes with an air of professionalism that Clint respected. Clint took the papers without hesitation, flipping through them quickly. "All right," Clint said, signing his name at the bottom of the contract. "I'm good. Let's wrap this up." Jack smiled, relieved, and reached for the keys to the car. "Great. We'll have everything ready for you in just a few minutes." As Clint prepared to leave the dealership, he felt an odd sense of accomplishment. It wasn't about the car, though the sedan was a nice touch, it was about something deeper. Clint had faced an unexpected challenge, and instead of letting his frustration take over, he had chosen a different path. He had given Jack a lesson in humility, yes, but he had also learned something about himself. The encounter at the dealership had reminded Clint of something he hadn't thought about in years: people weren't always what they seemed. There were always layers to uncover, always deeper stories waiting to be told. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you could do was to offer someone the chance to change. As Clint made his way out the door, the sound of his footsteps echoed in the empty showroom, and for the first time in a long while, Clint felt a sense of hope. Maybe this wasn't just a new car. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. Clint Eastwood settled into the plush leather seat of his new car, the engine purring softly beneath the hood. It was simple, nothing extravagant, but it felt right. The car was a symbol of what he had been searching for, something uncomplicated in a world that had always felt so loud and chaotic. Outside, the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. As Clint slowly pulled out of the dealership parking lot, a sense of calm washed over him, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts that had been swirling in his mind for days. His fingers gripped the steering wheel as he navigated through the streets, the familiar hum of the engine giving him a sense of peace. He had always loved the feeling of driving, being in control, moving through the world on his terms. It was a feeling he had cherished ever since he was a young man, back when life had been simpler. Back when he wasn't Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor. Back when he was just a man trying to make his way in the world. But even in the quiet solitude of his car, Clint couldn't escape the pull of his past. His phone buzzed, interrupting the stillness. He glanced down, hesitating for just a moment before picking it up. "Hey, Dad," the voice on the other end was familiar, and yet, it always carried a weight that Clint couldn't ignore. It was Scott, his son. "How's it going?" Clint's jaw tightened slightly, but he forced his tone to remain calm. "It's going fine. Just driving, you know." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Clint could almost feel the uncertainty in Scott's voice. "I was thinking. Maybe we could grab dinner sometime soon. Catch up a bit." Clint's heart sank. He hadn't seen Scott in weeks, and their relationship had always been strained. His son had followed in his footsteps, becoming an actor in his own right, but Clint had always struggled to connect with him on a deeper level. They had both been so busy, so consumed by their careers, that they had neglected the most important thing, the bond they shared as father and son. Clint sighed, his grip on the steering wheel tightening as he navigated another turn. "I don't know, Scott. I've got a lot on my plate right now. I get it, Dad, Scott said quickly. But I think it'd be good for us. You know, to just talk. Like we used to. Clint didn't respond right away. He knew Scott was right. There had been a time when they had been closer, when they had shared meals together, laughed at the same jokes, and just enjoyed each other's company. But that felt like a lifetime ago. He had been too wrapped up in his own world to notice how far apart they had grown. It was something Clint regretted deeply, though he had never been one to admit it openly. "All right, kid," Clint said finally, his voice softer than it had been a moment before. "We'll grab dinner. Let's figure something out." A sigh of relief echoed through the phone. "Thanks, Dad. I'll call you later to set it up." Clint hung up the phone, his mind racing. He hadn't expected to have that conversation today, and yet, it felt like the right moment. Maybe it was the new car, the fresh start he was embracing, or maybe it was just the realization that life had a funny way of throwing opportunities at you when you least expected them. Whatever it was, Clint couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. The road ahead seemed endless, and for the first time in a long time, Clint felt like he could breathe. He was no longer just Clint Eastwood, the actor. He was Clint Eastwood, the man, with all the complexities, regrets, and possibilities that came with it. As he drove, the scenery changed. The city skyline faded behind him, replaced by rolling hills and wide-open spaces. The rhythmic motion of the car felt almost meditative, as though it was carrying him to some unknown destination. And maybe, in a way, it was. Maybe this journey wasn't just about the miles he was putting behind him, it was about the emotional distance he was closing between himself and the life he had been living. For years, Clint had been running from the weight of his fame, from the expectations placed on him, from the broken relationships that had followed him throughout his life. But now, in this quiet moment, as he cruised down an empty highway, it felt like he was finally ready to stop. Ready to face what he had been avoiding. The headlights of another car appeared in the distance, and Clint instinctively checked his rearview mirror, ensuring he was in the right lane. It was a small, mundane action, but it grounded him. It reminded him that, despite everything, he was still in control. The hours passed, the sun dipping lower in the sky, and before long, Clint found himself on the outskirts of town. He didn't know exactly where he was headed, but that was part of the appeal. For the first time in ages, he wasn't rushing to a set, to a premiere, or to the next big project. He wasn't chasing anything, he was simply moving forward, letting life unfold in its own time. Eventually, the road turned off into a small, quiet town, one that Clint hadn't seen in years. He slowed the car, scanning the familiar streets, each one bringing back a flood of memories. He passed by the old diner where he used to eat when he was just starting out, and the gas station where he had once filled up his car during long road trips between film shoots. The town had changed, but in some ways, it hadn't. It was still the same place he remembered, a place that had seen him at his lowest and his highest. Clint pulled into the parking lot of a small restaurant and turned off the engine. He sat for a moment, just taking it all in, the simplicity of the moment, the quiet hum of the town around him. He wasn't sure why he had come here, but it felt like the right place to pause, to reflect, and to think about the next steps in his journey. He wasn't Clint Eastwood, the icon, in this moment. He was just Clint, a man finding his way back to the things that really mattered. The dinner was set for 7 p.m. at a modest restaurant just outside town. Clint had arrived early, as he always did, partly out of habit, partly because he didn't want to be late for something that felt different. He hadn't seen Scott in weeks, and their conversations had become few and far between, reduced to the occasional text or voicemail. They had become strangers in their own way, despite the bond of father and son that ran deep. As Clint sat at the table, his hands resting on the menu, he couldn't help but replay their last conversation over and over in his mind. He had agreed to dinner, but he wasn't sure what would come of it. What had Scott been up to? What did he want to say? And more importantly, was there any chance to repair the fracture that had grown between them? The door swung open, and Scott stepped inside, scanning the room before his eyes landed on Clint. Clint stood up, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly at the sight of his son. Scott had always looked so much like him, with the same strong jawline and piercing blue eyes, but now there were subtle signs of age creeping in, lines on his forehead, a few silver strands in his hair. Clint gave him a small, warm smile. "Hey, kid. You look good." Scott returned the smile, though it was a little tight, like he wasn't quite sure how to react. "Thanks, Dad. You too." The two exchanged a brief, almost awkward hug before sitting down. The waiter came over, but Clint waved him off, not in the mood to deal with a menu just yet. This was more important. "So, how's everything going?" Clint asked, leaning forward, his voice measured. He had no idea how Scott was really doing. For so long, their conversations had been surface level, about work, schedules, and the latest Hollywood gossip. But now, this was about more than that. It had to be. Scott sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's going. You know how it is." He looked away for a moment, his fingers drumming on the edge of the table. There was a pause, a thick silence that neither man seemed to know how to break. "I've been trying to make some sense of things. My career, my life. It's all been kind of up in the air lately." Clint's heart tightened. He knew how that felt. The uncertainty, the sense of drifting, of being pulled in 100 different directions with no clear path. "I get it," Clint said quietly. "It's easy to get lost in all of it." Scott met his eyes then, the vulnerability in his gaze startling Clint for a moment. "I'm trying to find my way. But I've been so caught up in everything. I haven't really been there for you. For us." The words hung heavy in the air, and Clint's chest tightened as he processed them. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time, though he hadn't realized how much he had needed it. "You've been busy, Scott," Clint said, his voice soft, but there was an edge to it, an edge that spoke of years of frustration and unspoken thoughts. "I've been busy too. But that's no excuse. We've both let this distance grow between us." Scott nodded, his eyes dropping to the table. "Yeah, I know. And I hate that. I've been trying to keep up with everything, my career, your career, trying to make something of myself, but I think I lost sight of what really matters. I wasn't there when you needed me." Clint felt the weight of his son's words, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a shift. The walls he'd built up over the years, walls of pride, of ego, of fear, were beginning to crack. Maybe they were both responsible for the distance. Maybe they both needed to admit that the years of silence had been a choice, not just a consequence of circumstance. "Scott," Clint began, his voice uncharacteristically tender, "I've been hard on you. I've tried to give you space, to let you figure things out on your own. But I think I was wrong to do that. I should have been there for you, more than I have been." The sincerity in Clint's voice caught Scott off guard, and Clint could see the surprise in his son's eyes. Scott swallowed hard, clearly trying to hold back emotion. "Dad, I'm sorry. I've been so caught up in proving myself, that I've pushed you away. I've let all the noise from the world distract me from the most important thing, family. You've always been there for me, even when I didn't appreciate it." There it was. The apology Clint had been waiting for. And, for the first time in years, he realized something: he didn't need to keep holding on to the past. He didn't need to keep blaming himself or Scott for the years that had been lost. What mattered now was the moment in front of them, and what they could do with it. "I guess we've both got some regrets," Clint said, his voice rough. "But that doesn't mean we can't fix things. We're still here, aren't we?" Scott nodded slowly, a small but genuine smile starting to form. "Yeah. I guess we are." The tension in the room seemed to ease, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Clint and Scott shared a moment of understanding. It was more than just a conversation, it was a turning point. "I'm proud of you, Scott," Clint said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years of unsaid words. "You've made it on your own. You don't need to prove anything to me." Scott's eyes softened, and he reached across the table, offering his father a handshake. "Thanks, Dad. That means more than you know." For the rest of the evening, the conversation flowed more easily, the awkwardness fading with every word spoken. They talked about everything and nothing, about the things they'd missed in each other's lives, about the people they'd met, about the simple joys and struggles that came with living in the world they did. When dinner finally came to a close, Clint found himself feeling lighter than he had in years. As they stood up to leave, Clint placed a hand on Scott's shoulder. "We've got a lot of catching up to do. Let's not wait so long next time." Scott smiled, his voice filled with warmth. "I'll make sure of it, Dad." As Clint walked out of the restaurant, he felt the weight of the evening settle in, but it was a good weight, a weight that spoke of healing, of reconciliation, and of new beginnings. Maybe the road ahead wasn't so uncertain after all. The days that followed Clint's dinner with Scott were filled with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in a long while, Clint didn't feel the weight of the past hanging over him. The connection he had longed for with his son was slowly but surely being rebuilt, and while there was still a lot of ground to cover, he felt hopeful. Life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it, and this time, he could sense that change was in the air. But as with all things, the calm didn't last. It was a Tuesday morning when Clint received the call. He had just finished his coffee, still in his robe, contemplating whether to go for a jog or tackle some work in the home office. He hadn't decided when his phone rang, the number unfamiliar but the area code unmistakable. "Hello. Mr. Eastwood," a voice on the other end said, smooth but firm, "this is Grant Farrow from Eastwood Motors. We've got a situation, and it needs your immediate attention." Clint's brow furrowed. Eastwood Motors was the dealership he had recently inherited, but he hadn't expected it to come with this level of responsibility so quickly. He had assumed there would be time for a slow transition, time to ease into the role of owner. But clearly, that wasn't the case. "What's the situation?" Clint asked, trying to keep his tone calm, though he was already feeling the familiar prickling of stress at the back of his neck. "There's been a breakdown in the management. Some of the sales staff are, well, they're acting out. There's discontent brewing, and if we don't address it, it could hurt the reputation of the dealership. We're seeing low morale, and some of the team members are questioning the direction of the business. I need your guidance on how to handle it." Clint leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the wooden armrest. He hadn't anticipated any of this. He had imagined that inheriting the dealership would be straightforward, a chance to expand his legacy in a new direction. Instead, it seemed he was walking into a storm that he wasn't prepared for. "I'll be there in an hour," Clint said, his voice firm despite the rising unease inside him. "Let's see what we're working with." After the call ended, Clint sat there for a moment, processing. This wasn't just about managing cars or finances, it was about people, personalities, and the chaos that often came with running a business. It felt like a weight he had never expected to carry. He had faced down challenges in his acting career, but this was different. This was something that was personal. As Clint drove to the dealership, he reflected on the phone call. Grant Farrow, the manager, had seemed competent, but Clint could hear the stress in his voice. This wasn't a minor issue, it was a crisis in the making. People were starting to doubt his leadership, and before he could make any decisions, he would need to understand what had gone wrong. Pulling into the parking lot of Eastwood Motors, Clint immediately noticed something was off. The lot, which had been full of polished cars just a few days ago, was nearly empty, save for a few scattered vehicles. There was no energy in the air, no sense of excitement, no buzz. The dealership felt lifeless. He stepped out of his car and made his way toward the front doors, his boots clicking against the pavement. Inside, the showroom was quiet, too quiet. The salespeople were sitting at their desks, whispering among themselves, casting furtive glances as Clint walked through the door. It wasn't the warm welcome he had envisioned. Grant Farrow, the manager, came out from the back office, his expression tense. He was a man in his late 30s, with neatly combed dark hair and a sharp suit. He looked the part of a professional, but there was a visible discomfort in his posture, like he wasn't sure how Clint would react to the situation. "Mr. Eastwood," Grant said, extending his hand, "thanks for coming in. I'm afraid things have gotten a bit out of hand." Clint shook Grant's hand firmly, taking in his surroundings. "Tell me what's going on. I need the full picture." Grant hesitated, then motioned for Clint to follow him into the office. Once inside, Grant closed the door and leaned against the desk. "It's not just one thing, Mr. Eastwood. It's a combination of factors. We've got a few seasoned salespeople who feel that their expertise is being overlooked. Then there's the new staff, some of them are young and inexperienced, but they're more outspoken. There's been a lot of tension, and morale is low. People are arguing over everything, from how to approach customers to how the dealership should be run. It's been dividing the team." Clint absorbed the information, his mind processing what needed to be done. This wasn't just about making quick decisions, it was about leadership, about restoring trust and guiding a group of people through turbulent times. "We need to bring the team together," Clint said after a long pause. "I'm not here to make enemies. But I am here to make this business work. If I'm going to do that, I need everyone on board." Grant nodded, but Clint could tell he wasn't convinced. "It's going to take more than words, Mr. Eastwood. There's a lot of frustration, and people are already looking for answers. They want to know if you're here to change things or if you're just going to let it fall apart." Clint looked Grant dead in the eye. "I'm not here to let anything fall apart. But I'm also not going to make promises I can't keep. I'll talk to the team. We'll figure this out together." Clint left the office with a heavy heart, knowing that this wasn't going to be easy. It was one thing to inherit a business, it was another to lead it through a crisis. But if there was one thing Clint knew from his years in Hollywood, it was this: nothing ever came easy. If he was going to make this work, he'd have to fight for it. The morning after Clint's confrontation with the team at Eastwood Motors, he woke up early. He had spent the entire night turning over the details of the previous day in his mind. He couldn't afford to sit back and hope things would get better on their own. There was no room for hesitation anymore. If he wanted to turn this business around, he had to make bold choices, decisions that would shake things up and show everyone that he wasn't just a figurehead. He was a leader. His mind was set as he drove back to the dealership. Today, things would change. When Clint walked into Eastwood Motors, it felt like the air was thicker than usual. The employees were more subdued, as if they were waiting for him to make the first move. Clint didn't waste any time. He walked straight into the showroom, where the salespeople were scattered around, whispering and huddling in small groups. Grant Farrow was at his desk, looking up with a tense smile as Clint approached. "Mr. Eastwood. I'm glad you're here. We were just talking about." "No time for talking," Clint interrupted, his voice firm. "We need to get this over with, once and for all." The room went silent as everyone turned their attention to him. Clint could feel their eyes on him, their expectations mounting. He had no intention of backing down now. The tension that had been building over the last few days needed to be addressed head-on, and Clint wasn't about to let anyone believe he couldn't handle the challenge. "Gather everyone in the conference room," Clint ordered. "It's time for a meeting. Now." Grant looked slightly taken aback, but he quickly stood up, calling for the staff to join them. It didn't take long for the entire team to gather in the small conference room. Clint stood at the front, his eyes scanning the room, taking in every face. He had worked with people from all walks of life in his acting career, but leading a business was an entirely different animal. This wasn't a film set, it was real, and there were real consequences for the decisions that were made. When the last person sat down, Clint cleared his throat and addressed the group. "I know things haven't been easy here lately," he began, his voice calm but authoritative. "I inherited this dealership, but that doesn't mean I'm here to let it fall apart. I'm here to make it work. And I need all of you to help me do that." There was a murmur of surprise. Clint had been the quiet, distant owner until now, but today, he was speaking with a resolve that none of them had seen before. He could tell they were still unsure, still skeptical of his ability to lead. "I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers," Clint continued. "But I do know this, we can't keep going on like we have been. The division, the back and forth, it's killing us. If we don't get on the same page, we're going to lose more than just customers. We'll lose respect for one another. And that's something I won't stand for." Clint's eyes met Grant's, then scanned the rest of the team. He knew this wasn't just about fixing the company, it was about fixing the culture. "I don't know what you're all used to, but this is my dealership now. And I run things differently. We're going to work together. We're going to talk, communicate, and work as a team. No more cliques. No more silence. We're all in this together." The room was silent for a moment, and Clint let the weight of his words sink in. It was a gamble, but it was the only way to begin the healing process. Finally, one of the salespeople, a woman Clint had only met briefly, spoke up. "What exactly do you mean by work together? Are you going to change how things are done here, or are we supposed to just sit back and wait for something to happen?" Clint smiled, a glint of determination in his eyes. "You're going to see changes. Some of them may be tough, but they'll be necessary. I'm going to give everyone a chance to share what they think is wrong and what can be improved. And I'll listen. I may not have all the answers, but I promise I'll do everything I can to make this work." Another salesperson, a man Clint recognized from the sales floor, leaned forward. "And what if we don't agree with everything you decide? Are we going to be replaced? Is that what you're saying?" Clint didn't flinch. He understood their concerns. This wasn't just about his authority, it was about their livelihoods, their futures. And if he was going to lead, he had to be honest with them, even if it made them uncomfortable. "If you don't agree, I'll listen. But if we can't find common ground, then maybe we'll need to part ways. But I'm not here to replace people unless it's absolutely necessary. I want to build something with you all. But I can't do it alone." The room was quiet again, but this time it felt different. There was a sense of understanding in the air, an acknowledgement that Clint was willing to step up and do whatever it took to make the dealership succeed. Grant stood up, looking at the team, then back at Clint. "I think you've made your point, Mr. Eastwood. We'll do what we can to support you. We want this to work too." Clint nodded. "Good. I'm counting on you all. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but I believe we can do it. Together." As the meeting came to an end, Clint felt a sense of cautious optimism. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in days, he felt like he was on the right path. There was still a long road ahead, full of obstacles and setbacks, but he was ready for it. He wasn't just Clint Eastwood, the actor, the legend. He was Clint Eastwood, the businessman. And he was about to prove that he could handle both. Clint spent the next few days observing the reactions from his team. The meeting he'd held in the conference room had shaken things up, but the true test was whether his words would translate into action. People were still tentative, still watching him carefully, unsure if his changes would bring lasting improvements or just be another round of empty promises. But Clint wasn't backing down. He spent more time on the sales floor, engaging with his employees, even if it was just a quick, "How's it going today?" or "What do you need help with?" It wasn't much, but it was a start. He was making himself available, showing that he wasn't just a distant owner, he was part of the team. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Clint had been sitting at his desk going through paperwork when he heard a knock at the door. He looked up to find Alex, one of the newer salespeople, standing hesitantly in the doorway. "Got a minute?" Alex asked, voice tinged with uncertainty. Clint nodded and gestured for him to come in. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Alex stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The young man was in his mid-20s, bright-eyed with a hint of nervousness that made Clint instantly relate to him. Clint had been that young once, unsure of his place in the world, trying to figure out how to prove himself. He could see a lot of himself in Alex. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day," Alex began. "About working together, about changing things up. And, I wanted to talk to you about something." Clint raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. "I'm listening." Alex hesitated again before speaking. "You see, things have been really tense around here. I know you've noticed it, but I don't think anyone's been brave enough to say it out loud. I don't know if it's because of the old way things were done or if it's just a lack of leadership, but, well, a lot of people feel stuck. They don't know if you're just here to change the rules or if you're actually going to lead us out of this mess." Clint felt a twinge in his chest. He had expected resistance, but hearing it out loud, spoken with such raw honesty, made it feel more real. It wasn't just a business issue, it was about people's lives, their trust, and their future. "I appreciate you coming to me with this," Clint said, his voice softening. "It's not easy to speak up, but you're right. I don't want to just change the rules, I want to lead. But I can't do that if I don't know where we're starting from." Alex nodded, relieved that Clint was actually listening. "I think what people need is a direction. A real plan. Not just words, but a solid vision of where we're headed." Clint considered this for a moment, then leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "You're right. And I've been so focused on trying to fix everything all at once that I haven't taken the time to really lay out the long-term plan. Maybe it's time I change that." Alex seemed to brighten. "I think if you did that, a lot of people would feel better." "I know I would." Clint smiled slightly, appreciating the sincerity in Alex's words. "All right, then. I'll put something together. But you know, you're not the first person to bring this up." Alex looked surprised. "Really?" Clint nodded. "No one's been brave enough to tell me outright, but I can see it. I've been making a lot of changes, but I haven't really laid out where I want this dealership to go. It's time I do that." There was a brief silence as Clint thought about how to approach this next step. He had to show the team that he wasn't just reacting to the chaos, he was actively creating a new vision for Eastwood Motors, one that would give them something to believe in. He needed to take control, but this time, it would be with purpose. "All right," Clint said, standing up. "I'm going to meet with the team tomorrow morning. We're going to have a sit-down, and I'm going to lay out a clear plan for the future. It's time to set some goals and make sure we're all aligned. How does that sound?" Alex's face lit up. "That sounds great, Mr. Eastwood. Really great." As Alex left Clint's office, Clint leaned against his desk, his mind racing. He had a vision for Eastwood Motors, but it wasn't just about sales figures or car deals. It was about creating a culture of collaboration, of pride in their work, and of a team that felt like a family. But to get there, he had to be bold, and he had to start by showing them that he wasn't just another owner looking to make a quick buck. He was in this for the long haul. That night, Clint sat down with a notebook, outlining the key points he wanted to address the next day. He would start by acknowledging the team's concerns, then he would share his vision, a vision that would not only improve the business but also give everyone a sense of purpose. He wasn't just going to steer the ship, he was going to inspire the crew. The next morning, Clint walked into the dealership with a new sense of purpose. The atmosphere was still tense, but now he knew what he had to do. He couldn't change everything overnight, but he could begin laying the groundwork for a future they could all work toward. The meeting that followed was the turning point Clint had been waiting for. He stood before his team, not as a distant figurehead, but as a leader who had finally found his footing. "I know it hasn't been easy," Clint began, looking each person in the eye. "And I know I've been pushing hard for change. But I'm not doing this to make your jobs harder, I'm doing it to make us all better. I'm here to lead this dealership, and I want all of you to be a part of it. We can't do this alone, but together, we can make Eastwood Motors something to be proud of." As Clint laid out his vision for the dealership, something shifted in the room. For the first time, the employees were listening, not just to the words, but to the man behind them. They saw a leader who had a plan, a leader who was not afraid to admit mistakes but also knew how to move forward. And for the first time, Clint felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Clint's presentation in the morning had left a ripple of optimism through the dealership. It wasn't just the plan that got people talking, but the sense of ownership he was trying to instill. People were starting to see that he wasn't just a celebrity businessman, but a man who was truly invested in their success. The groundwork was laid, and now it was time to see if his vision would take root. But, as Clint had come to realize, any transformation, no matter how promising, would come with its fair share of hurdles. What he hadn't fully anticipated were the unseen challenges, the things that couldn't be fixed with a meeting or a plan. These were the deep-rooted issues, the personal struggles, the office politics, and the lingering doubts, that threatened to pull everything apart. It didn't take long for Clint to see the cracks beginning to show. The first sign came during the sales meeting that afternoon. Clint had asked Grant, the sales manager, to report on the numbers for the week, eager to see the early results of the changes he'd implemented. As Grant began his presentation, Clint noticed the tension between him and some of the other salespeople. There was no open hostility, but the cold shoulders and the stilted conversation were unmistakable. When Grant finally spoke, his voice was steady, but Clint could sense the underlying frustration. "We've seen a slight increase in foot traffic, but not much improvement in actual sales. Some of the new methods, like the team-based approach you suggested, haven't really been embraced by everyone yet." Clint nodded, trying to mask the disappointment. He had hoped the team would buy into his new vision faster. "What's the main issue? Why haven't the changes been more effective?" Grant hesitated, casting a glance around the room. "Well, there's some resistance. Not everyone's on board. And I think, some people are still stuck in their old ways. They're not seeing the benefit of your new approach yet." "All right, let's open it up," Clint said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Who's got something to add? What are the concerns?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, just as Clint was about to push forward, Rachel, a senior salesperson, spoke up. "I think we need to talk about expectations. Everyone's been scrambling, trying to get used to the new approach, but there's not much clarity. We don't know what we're really working toward, and it's hard to stay motivated when we don't see where this is going." The words hung in the air. Clint felt a sting of frustration, but he forced himself to stay composed. Rachel wasn't wrong. It was one thing to have a vision, but it was another to clearly communicate that vision in a way that made it feel attainable. Clint had assumed that people would naturally buy into the idea of growth, but he now realized that he had missed a crucial step: clarity. "I hear you, Rachel," Clint said. "And I think you're right. We need to tighten up the plan and make sure everyone understands the goal. It's not just about the numbers. It's about creating a place where we can all thrive together. I'm going to work on that." The meeting ended soon after, but the air in the room was thick with uncertainty. Clint could feel the weight of the challenge ahead. It wasn't just about changing the sales strategies or pushing for higher numbers. It was about breaking through the resistance, about making each person feel like they had a real stake in the dealership's success. And right now, it was clear that many of them still felt disconnected. As Clint walked back to his office, the enormity of the task began to settle in. He had believed that leadership would come naturally, that his experience, his vision, and his status would be enough to unite the team. But what he hadn't anticipated was the deep emotional connection people had to their work. The old habits and routines they'd clung to were not just business practices, they were part of their identities. Changing that wasn't going to happen overnight. But Clint wasn't one to back down. He knew that challenges were part of the process. This was just another obstacle to overcome. Later that afternoon, Clint decided to meet with Grant to discuss the sales team's concerns in more detail. He knew that Grant, despite his outward composure, was dealing with his own set of pressures. Clint needed to get to the heart of what was really going on behind the scenes. Grant was waiting for him in his office, sitting behind his desk with a furrowed brow. When Clint walked in, he immediately stood up, offering a handshake. "Mr. Eastwood, thanks for taking the time to meet. I know it's been a lot to juggle lately." Clint shook his hand and sat down. "No problem, Grant. I appreciate the hard work. I just want to make sure we're on the same page here. You mentioned some resistance from the team, and I need to know exactly what's going on. What's the real story?" Grant paused, looking down at his hands. "It's a tricky situation. Some of the older salespeople are skeptical. They've been here for years, and they've seen management come and go. They don't believe in new ideas anymore. And then there's the younger crowd, the ones who are excited about change, but they don't always know how to work together. It's hard to get them all moving in the same direction." Clint listened carefully, his mind working through the nuances of the situation. "So, it's not just about the strategy, it's about trust. They don't trust that these changes are going to stick." Grant nodded. "Exactly. They're waiting to see if you're just another flavor of the month." Clint let out a long sigh. It was a tough reality to face, but it was a reality nonetheless. The team's resistance wasn't just a business hurdle, it was an emotional one. They had to believe in him first before they could believe in the changes he was trying to make. "Well," Clint said, sitting up straighter, "I guess it's time to prove them wrong. I'm going to make sure they know I'm not going anywhere. And I'm going to show them that I'm not just talking the talk, I'm walking the walk." Grant smiled slightly. "I think that's exactly what they need to see." Clint stood up, determined. "All right, we've got work to do." Clint's resolve had been tested in ways he hadn't anticipated, but the stakes had never felt higher. His vision for Eastwood Motors was beginning to feel more like a distant dream than a tangible reality. While some employees were beginning to show signs of support, others were still quietly skeptical. The change he had hoped for wasn't happening quickly enough, and time was running out. The dealership needed a solid boost, and Clint knew that the upcoming month would be critical to proving that his leadership was more than just words. The pressure was mounting from all sides, his employees, his investors, and even his own growing doubts. The lingering fear of failure had crept in, slowly infecting his every thought. The dealership's sales were hovering below expectations, and Clint couldn't afford another month of disappointing numbers. He had to find a way to inspire his team to embrace the new direction. One morning, as Clint was pacing the dealership floor, trying to work through his ideas, he was interrupted by a familiar voice. "Clint, can I talk to you for a minute?" It was Rachel, the senior salesperson. Despite her earlier reservations, she had become one of the most vocal supporters of Clint's changes, even though her skepticism still lingered beneath the surface. Clint smiled, gesturing for her to join him in his office. "Of course, Rachel. What's on your mind?" Rachel stepped into the office and sat down across from him. She exhaled slowly, as though weighing her words carefully before speaking. "I think you're doing a good job, Clint," she began, her voice warm yet cautious. "I see what you're trying to do here. I really do. But there's something we need to talk about. We need a boost, a real one. The energy in this place is flat. We need something to shake things up." Clint leaned forward, eager to understand. "What kind of boost are you thinking about?" Rachel's eyes flickered with thought, then she looked directly at Clint. We need a big, bold event. Something that will get people talking, not just our customers, but the whole community. A grand opening, a special promotion, something that brings in the crowds and shows them we're different. Right now, it feels like we're just another dealership. People need to feel like they can't miss out on what we're offering. We need to create an event that changes the narrative. Clint felt a spark of hope ignite within him. Rachel was right, he needed something big to rally the team around. He'd been too focused on internal restructuring, but it was time to take action in a way that would energize the whole dealership. If he could get the community to notice Eastwood Motors, maybe the momentum would carry over to his employees. That sounds like exactly what we need, Clint said, standing up. All right, let's do it. Let's plan something unforgettable. In the following days, Clint and Rachel worked together to organize an event that would put Eastwood Motors back on the map. They brainstormed ideas for a grand opening celebration, one that would combine a car show, live music, and special promotions. Clint knew it wasn't going to be easy, organizing an event on such short notice was a monumental task, but he also knew that it was their best shot at reinvigorating the dealership. It was a chance to show the community that Eastwood Motors was here to stay. As the event day approached, Clint felt a surge of adrenaline. His team rallied around the idea, working late into the night to make sure everything was ready. They set up booths, coordinated food trucks, and made sure the showroom was sparkling clean. Clint could see the change in the employees' attitude. This wasn't just a job anymore, this was something they were all invested in. But as the day of the event finally arrived, Clint couldn't shake the growing feeling of anxiety. What if it didn't work? What if the event turned out to be a bust? He had no choice but to put those thoughts aside. There was no turning back now. He had to make this work. The morning of the event, Eastwood Motors was buzzing with activity. The parking lot was lined with classic cars, and a stage had been set up for live music. The sound of the band warming up filled the air, and the smell of food from the trucks mixed with the scent of fresh tires and leather. It was a spectacle, and Clint could feel the anticipation building. He had done everything he could to make this a success, it was now in the hands of the community. As the event opened, a flood of people began to pour into the dealership. Customers wandered around the lot, admiring the cars, while others queued up for food or to check out the live performances. Clint watched from the sidelines, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. He was relieved to see his employees working the crowd with enthusiasm, engaging with potential buyers, and showing off the vehicles with a newfound pride. By the afternoon, it was clear that the event was turning out to be a hit. The energy in the dealership had shifted. People were laughing, talking, and most importantly, buying. Clint couldn't remember the last time he had seen so many customers excited to be at Eastwood Motors. He found Rachel in the middle of the crowd, talking to a group of potential customers. She smiled when she saw him approaching. "It's working, Clint," she said, her eyes lighting up. "The buzz is real. People are actually talking about us. I think we've finally got them hooked." Clint grinned, relieved. "I knew it would work. But it's not just about the event, it's about showing people that we're different. That we care. That we're here to stay." As the sun began to set and the event started winding down, Clint felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't experienced in a long time. The dealership had exceeded its sales targets for the month, and the local community had taken notice. They weren't just talking about Eastwood Motors, they were talking about Clint Eastwood himself. That night, Clint sat alone in his office, reflecting on everything that had happened. The event had been a turning point for Eastwood Motors, but it was also a reminder of how far he had come. When he'd first walked through the dealership doors, it felt like an uphill battle. But now, with the team behind him, he had proven that change was possible, and that he was capable of leading them into a new era. The challenge wasn't over, but Clint was beginning to believe that, maybe, just maybe, they could overcome anything together. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Clint sat in his office, the weight of the day pressing on him like a heavy stone. The event had been a success, no doubt about it. Sales were up, the dealership had gained some much-needed attention, and the team seemed revitalized. But now, as the excitement settled, Clint began to see the darker side of victory. The phone rang, and he answered it without thinking. "Clint, we need to talk," it was Grant's voice, filled with a sense of urgency. "Grant, what's going on?" Clint replied, his stomach tightening. "It's about Rachel." She's gone," Grant said, a sharp edge in his voice. Clint felt his heart drop. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "She walked out, Clint. Left her desk, packed her stuff, and didn't say a word to anyone. I don't know what happened. But I think it's related to the changes we've been making." Clint's mind raced. Rachel had been one of his strongest allies in this whole endeavor. To lose her now, after everything they'd accomplished, was a crushing blow. He'd seen the spark in her eyes during the event. She was one of the few people who had really bought into the vision, and yet now, she was gone. Where did she go? Did anyone try to reach her? Clint asked, his voice growing more frantic. "I don't know, Clint. I've been trying to call her, but no luck. It's like she just disappeared. I think something happened, something personal. But I don't know for sure." Clint hung up the phone, staring blankly at the wall. The sense of triumph from the event had evaporated. He thought back to the conversation with Rachel just days ago, how hopeful she seemed about the future of Eastwood Motors. What had changed? Why would she leave now? Without wasting any more time, Clint grabbed his coat and rushed out of his office. He had to find Rachel, and he had to do it now. The first place Clint went was her apartment, but it was locked up tight. There was no sign of her. He knocked on the door, calling her name, but there was no answer. His mind raced through all the possibilities. Had she gone on vacation? Was this just a temporary break? But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that Rachel was a crucial part of the team, and losing her wasn't just personal, it was business. This was a blow to the momentum they had fought so hard to build. Clint couldn't just sit around and wait for things to resolve themselves. He knew that Rachel's absence would send ripples throughout the dealership. It wasn't just about one person leaving, it was about what her departure signaled. Could they maintain the energy from the event without her leadership? Was the dealership just another ticking time bomb waiting to fall apart? Frustration bubbled inside him. He hated feeling powerless, and this situation was no different. Clint had always been the one to take control, but now he was chasing after someone who had slipped through his fingers. What if Rachel had been the glue holding everything together? What if, without her, the whole team would crumble? Days passed, and Clint couldn't shake the nagging feeling of loss. The dealership had been quieter without Rachel's presence. While the event had provided a temporary high, things were slowly starting to return to the way they were before. People were still motivated, but there was a noticeable dip in the energy of the room. Clint's worst fear was starting to come true. Without Rachel's support, he wasn't sure if he could rally the team again. It wasn't just Rachel's departure that bothered him, it was the questions it raised about his leadership. He'd tried to be the changemaker, the visionary. But had he pushed too hard, too fast? Had he failed to listen to his people? It was a gut-wrenching thought, and it made Clint question everything he had believed about his approach. Then, late one afternoon, Clint received a text from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. The message was short and direct: "I need to talk. Meet me at the old diner." Clint's heart skipped a beat. The old diner. It was a place he used to go when he needed to think, a quiet spot just outside of town. The fact that Rachel had reached out gave him a glimmer of hope. Maybe she hadn't completely given up. Maybe there was still a chance to salvage what they had started. When Clint arrived at the diner, the place was nearly empty. The neon sign outside flickered in the dusk, casting an eerie glow on the quiet street. He spotted Rachel immediately, sitting in a booth by the window, her back to him. She hadn't changed much, but there was a sadness in her posture that Clint hadn't seen before. He slid into the booth across from her. "Rachel," he said softly. "What's going on? What happened?" Rachel looked up, her eyes tired and distant. "Clint, I didn't want to leave. I really didn't. But I couldn't stay. Everything felt wrong. I couldn't pretend anymore." Clint felt a pang of regret deep in his chest. "What do you mean? I thought we were making progress. The event, everything, it was working. You were the one who was excited about this, Rachel." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "But it's not just about the event. It's about the way you're running things. The pressure, Clint, it's too much. I get it. You're trying to change everything, but you're doing it all wrong. You can't just make people believe in something because you say so. They have to feel it. They have to trust you. And right now, I don't think anyone trusts you." "Not really." Clint felt his chest tighten. He had thought Rachel understood the vision, but now he saw the cracks in her belief. It wasn't just about selling cars, it was about building relationships, and Clint had overlooked the most crucial part, trust. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't realize. I was so focused on the big picture that I didn't see what was right in front of me. I didn't see the pressure I was putting on everyone." Rachel looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting. "I don't want to give up on you, Clint. But I can't keep going like this. I have to take a step back and figure out what's best for me. I just don't know if this place is it anymore." Clint sat there for a long moment, the silence between them thick with unsaid words. His heart ached at the thought of losing Rachel, but deep down, he knew she was right. He had to change the way he led, not just for his own sake, but for the sake of everyone at Eastwood Motors. This wasn't just about selling cars or making money, it was about building a real, lasting foundation that people could believe in. And right now, Clint wasn't sure if he had done that. Rachel stood up to leave, her eyes meeting his one last time. "I hope you figure it out, Clint. I really do." As she walked away, Clint remained in the booth, his mind spinning. The dealership, his team, his dreams, they all felt so far out of reach now. But if this was the price of his failure, then maybe it was time for him to pay it. The next few days felt like a blur for Clint. After Rachel's departure, everything seemed to lose its momentum. The dealership was quieter, and though there were still some customers trickling in, the excitement had vanished. Clint had tried to keep things running smoothly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was missing. His mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Rachel. Her words had cut deeper than he'd expected. It wasn't just about her leaving, it was the realization that he had been so focused on pushing forward that he had neglected the very foundation he was trying to build. He had overlooked the most essential aspect of leadership, connection. Trust. He had been so focused on driving change that he forgot that change needed to be earned, not demanded. Clint found himself at the dealership early one morning, long before anyone else arrived. He needed space to think, to gather his thoughts. Sitting in the same office where he'd once felt so confident, he now felt like an imposter. The walls seemed to close in on him as he pondered his next move. He was at a crossroads. He could either continue down this path, trying to force his vision into a reality, or he could stop and listen. Really listen. It was then that he realized the truth: he couldn't do it alone. Clint had tried to shoulder the weight of everything by himself. He had thought he had all the answers, but now he saw that his arrogance had clouded his judgment. He had to rebuild the trust of his team, starting with the people who had been there from the beginning. Clint's first move was to call a meeting with his team. He knew it wouldn't be easy. After all, Rachel's departure had shaken them, but it was time to face the music. He had to be honest with them, and he had to show them that he was willing to listen and change. The next afternoon, the employees gathered in the conference room. Clint stood at the front, trying to calm the nervous energy that filled the room. Everyone was looking to him for direction, but now, for the first time in a long while, Clint wasn't sure of the way forward. "Look, I know things haven't been easy lately," Clint began, his voice steady but heavy with sincerity. "I've made mistakes. I've been so focused on the future and what I thought needed to happen here that I lost sight of the most important thing, all of you." There was a slight shift in the room as Clint's words began to sink in. His employees had always respected him, but now they could see a different side of their leader, one that was vulnerable and willing to admit his shortcomings. "I pushed too hard," Clint continued. "I wanted things to change, and I thought the best way to do that was by pushing everyone to their limits. But I didn't stop to think about how it would affect you. And I didn't listen enough. I didn't build trust the way I should have." A long silence followed, and Clint's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know how they would respond, but he had to say it. He had to make it right. "I'm sorry," Clint said, his voice softer now. "And I want to make it right. I need your help. I can't do this alone. If we're going to make Eastwood Motors a place we're all proud of, we have to do it together." For a moment, no one spoke. The room felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then, finally, Grant spoke up, his voice gruff but understanding. "Clint, we know you're trying. We know you want to make this work. But it's going to take time. It's going to take trust. And we have to be in this together, too. You're not the only one who needs to make changes. We all do." Clint nodded, grateful for Grant's words. "I understand, and I'm committed to that. I'm willing to work alongside you, to listen to your ideas and concerns. But I need to know, are you with me?" One by one, the team nodded. Slowly, their faces softened, and Clint could see the first signs of hope returning. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But this was a new beginning. The days that followed were a mixture of hard work, reflection, and gradual change. Clint made a point of listening more than he spoke, taking time to sit down with each employee and hear their thoughts on how to improve the dealership. Slowly, the team began to feel more connected, more like a family than a group of individuals working for a common goal. Rachel's departure was still a wound that hadn't fully healed, but Clint knew that he couldn't dwell on it. He had to keep moving forward and prove that he could be the leader they needed. As the days passed, he noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere at Eastwood Motors. There was more collaboration, more laughter, and more genuine conversations happening between colleagues. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One afternoon, Clint found himself standing in front of the dealership, looking at the cars on the lot. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow across the vehicles. He felt a sense of calm wash over him as he realized something important: he was no longer just a man trying to prove himself. He was a leader, one who had learned from his mistakes and was ready to build something meaningful. The next week, Clint received a phone call from Rachel. His heart skipped a beat as he answered the phone. "Clint." Her voice was soft, but there was a sense of warmth in it that he hadn't expected. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. And I want to talk." Clint felt a rush of relief. "Rachel, I've been trying to reach you. I've missed you here, and I want to make things right. Whatever happened, we can fix it. Together. I'm not sure about coming back to Eastwood Motors yet," Rachel said. "But I'm willing to talk about it. And I think I can offer some advice on how you can take things to the next level. If you're open to it." Clint smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Of course. I'd be grateful for any advice you have. Let's meet." The weeks that followed Clint's meeting with his team were a whirlwind of self-reflection and change. He knew that building a true sense of community at Eastwood Motors wasn't something that could be achieved overnight. The foundation had to be solid, and that meant focusing on the people first, the cars second. It was a difficult realization for Clint, who had always been driven by results. But as he worked through his mistakes, he understood that leadership wasn't just about numbers, it was about trust, communication, and the ability to inspire those around him to be better. Clint spent his days meeting with employees, engaging in one-on-one conversations, and really listening to what they had to say. He wanted to understand their frustrations, their hopes, and their visions for the dealership. Slowly but surely, the walls that had once divided the team started to crumble. There were still moments of tension, but there was a renewed sense of purpose in the air. Clint made it a priority to show that he wasn't just the boss, but a partner in their journey. The team needed to feel like they had ownership of the dealership, that their voices mattered in shaping its future. One afternoon, as Clint was walking the lot, Grant caught up with him, a look of optimism in his eyes. "Clint, there's something I need to talk to you about," Grant began, his voice quiet but firm. "What's up?" Clint asked, stopping to face him. "I've been thinking a lot about Rachel's departure, and I think it's time we make a change. I know we've been talking about the future of Eastwood Motors, but I don't think it's just about changing the way we do business. We need to shift how we think about success, what we're really striving for. Right now, it feels like we're just trying to catch up. We need a new vision, something that excites everyone here. And I think you're the right person to lead it." Clint was quiet for a moment, taking in Grant's words. "You're right. I've been so focused on keeping things afloat, I haven't been thinking about the bigger picture. Maybe I've been too stubborn, too wrapped up in what I thought needed to happen." Grant smiled, the weight of the conversation lifting slightly. "You've learned a lot over the last few months. We all have. I think it's time we put that knowledge to good use and really take things to the next level." Clint felt a spark of excitement in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he could see a way forward, a real way forward. "You're right. I've been running on autopilot. It's time to stop and truly think about what we want Eastwood Motors to be. And it's going to start with listening to the people who matter most, the team. We need to redefine what success means around here." Grant's expression softened, and he placed a hand on Clint's shoulder. "Exactly. And I'll be right there with you every step of the way." Clint looked at his friend and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Things weren't perfect, but they were improving. Slowly, but surely, the pieces were coming together. Later that week, Clint gathered the entire staff in the conference room once again. This time, the energy was different. There was no tension, no apprehension, just anticipation. Clint had decided to approach the meeting with a new mindset. Instead of presenting his ideas, he asked for theirs. "All right, everyone," Clint began, standing at the front with a calm, open expression. "We've been through a lot in the past few months. And I'm sure you've all noticed that things are different now. We've learned a lot, and I want to hear from all of you. What do we need to do to make Eastwood Motors a place we're all proud to be a part of?" The room was silent for a moment, but then Jessica, one of the sales reps, spoke up. "I think we need to focus on creating stronger relationships with our customers. It's not just about selling them a car, it's about making them feel like they're a part of something. We need to build that trust." Clint nodded thoughtfully. "That's a great point. Building trust with our customers is key. What else?" Grant raised his hand and added, "We need to prioritize teamwork. We've got a great group of people here, but we need to make sure everyone feels like they have a role to play in the success of this dealership. No one should feel like they're on their own." Another employee, Malik, chimed in. "And we need to be more transparent. There's been a lot of confusion in the past, and we need to be clear about where we're headed and what our goals are. People will follow you, Clint, but you have to show them the way." Clint took all of this in, feeling a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in months. "I agree with everything you've said. We've been so focused on pushing forward that we haven't taken the time to ensure we're all on the same page. We need a vision, something everyone can get behind. And we need to work together to achieve it. After the meeting, Clint met with Grant to discuss the next steps. They spent hours brainstorming ideas, writing down goals, and mapping out a strategy that was more inclusive and focused on building a community within the dealership. They knew it wasn't going to be an easy road, but it felt like they had found their footing. The following week, Clint called Rachel again, hoping to get her perspective on the new direction they were headed. This time, her voice was warmer, less guarded. "I've been hearing some things, Clint," Rachel said with a chuckle. "I hear Eastwood Motors is turning things around." "That's good to hear." "I hope so," Clint replied, his tone hopeful. "I think we're finally on the right track. We've made some big changes in how we're approaching things. I know I can't change the past, but I want to make sure the future is something we can all be proud of. And if you ever decide you want to come back and help, there's always a place for you here." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Clint held his breath. Finally, Rachel spoke. "I appreciate that, Clint. I really do. And I'm glad to hear that things are moving in the right direction. I'm not sure about coming back yet, but I'll keep you in mind. You've got a good team, Clint. Don't forget that." Clint smiled, a weight lifting off his shoulders. "I won't forget." Clint stood in front of the dealership once again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still long, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges. But he was no longer running from the lessons he needed to learn. He was embracing them. With the support of his team, he knew they could turn Eastwood Motors into something truly special. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the lot, Clint couldn't help but feel hopeful. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face it. Clint had begun to feel a sense of pride again. After months of struggling, the pieces of Eastwood Motors were starting to fall into place. There was a renewed energy in the dealership. Sales were picking up, employees were working together more cohesively, and Clint was finally beginning to feel the weight of the responsibility lifting. But even as things seemed to improve, Clint knew the hardest tests were still ahead. It was a Thursday morning when Clint received the call. He was sitting at his desk, reviewing the new sales goals they'd set for the quarter, when his phone rang. The number on the screen wasn't one he recognized, but something in his gut told him it was important. "Hello?" Clint answered, trying to sound calm despite the nagging sense of anxiety that crept up his spine. "Clint Eastwood." The voice on the other end was sharp, professional, and a little too cold for Clint's liking. "This is Bob Sanders from the corporate office. I'm the regional manager for all Eastwood dealerships in the area." Clint's heart skipped a beat. Eastwood Motors had been a family-run operation for years, and Clint had never had much interaction with the corporate side of things. "Yes, I'm Clint Eastwood. How can I help you, Mr. Sanders?" "I've been following your performance at the dealership," Bob said. "And I'm not sure I'm impressed. I've heard reports about the changes you've been making. Some of them seem a bit unconventional. We're a well-established brand, Clint. We don't take kindly to anyone trying to reinvent the wheel." Clint felt a pang of irritation but kept his tone neutral. "I'm not trying to reinvent anything. I'm just focusing on what works for our team and our customers. It's about making Eastwood Motors a place people can trust, where the staff feels valued." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Clint could feel the tension mounting. "I've heard a lot about this trust thing," Bob said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "But let's be honest, Clint, the bottom line is sales. If the sales don't follow the changes you're making, you're going to find yourself in trouble." Clint took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He had been expecting resistance. What kind of change didn't come with its challenges? "I understand, Mr. Sanders. I'm confident that the changes we've made will pay off. We've already seen an improvement in our team dynamics and customer satisfaction. Sales are up. Up, huh? Bob sounded dubious. I'll be in town next week. I'm going to visit your dealership and see things for myself. I'll decide if your improvements are worth the trouble or if you're just wasting company resources. Clint gritted his teeth. He didn't like the sound of that. I'll look forward to your visit, Mr. Sanders. Thank you for your time. As soon as the call ended, Clint sat back in his chair, staring at the wall. He hadn't realized how much the corporate side of things still had a grip on the dealership. And now, it seemed like everything he had worked for was being put to the test by a man who cared only about the numbers. Clint knew that if he didn't prove the value of his changes, the dealership's future could be in jeopardy. The following days were filled with a mixture of nervous anticipation and preparation. Clint met with his team, explaining the situation and stressing the importance of showing the corporate manager just how far they'd come. They all knew that Bob Sanders' visit would be a critical moment. If they could show him that the changes had made a positive impact, they would secure their place in the company's future. But if they faltered, they risked everything. Grant was the first to speak up when Clint shared the news with the team. "We're ready for this," he said with determination. "We've been working hard, and we've made some solid improvements. All we need to do is show him that we're not just about pushing cars, we're about building relationships, both with our customers and with each other." Clint nodded. "Exactly. But we need to be strategic. We can't just talk about it, we need to show him. I want to see us all working together like we never have before. Customer service, teamwork, the whole shebang. Let's make sure Bob sees what we've built here." The team rallied behind him, their energy renewed. They knew what was at stake. Over the next few days, Clint pushed them harder than he had in the past, but this time, it felt different. There was no resentment in the air. Everyone understood why they were doing it. The sense of purpose that had been missing for so long was back. The day of Bob Sanders' visit arrived. Clint had spent the entire morning making sure everything was in order, cars on the lot were polished, sales materials were neatly arranged, and the showroom was spotless. The employees were primed and ready, wearing their best outfits and flashing their most genuine smiles. At precisely noon, Clint saw the sleek black sedan pull into the parking lot. Bob Sanders stepped out, dressed in a crisp suit, his face betraying nothing as he surveyed the dealership. Clint walked toward him, trying to keep his nerves in check. "Mr. Sanders," Clint said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Eastwood Motors. It's good to finally meet you in person." Bob shook his hand with a firm grip. "Clint. Let's see if all the changes you've been talking about are worth the trouble." Clint smiled, though his heart was racing. "I think you'll be impressed." The next few hours were a blur. Bob Sanders spent time touring the dealership, meeting with the sales team, and speaking to customers who were browsing the lot. Clint followed him closely, providing explanations and highlighting the changes they had made to improve both customer service and internal communication. Bob was thorough in his questioning, but Clint could see the subtle shifts in his demeanor as the day went on. At first, he had been distant, almost condescending. But as he observed the team working together and saw the positive energy in the building, Clint noticed a change in his body language. He was softening, albeit ever so slightly. Finally, as the day drew to a close, Bob took Clint aside. "I'll admit, I didn't expect to see what I saw today," Bob said, his tone grudgingly respectful. "You've got a good team here. I can see that things are running smoothly. But don't think I'm completely sold. It'll take time to see if these improvements are sustainable." Clint nodded, understanding. "I know it won't happen overnight, but I'm confident that we're on the right path." Bob gave him a sharp look before finally nodding. "All right, Clint. I'll report back to corporate. Keep up the good work, but remember, don't get complacent. I'll be watching." As Bob Sanders drove away, Clint exhaled deeply, his muscles relaxing for the first time that day. The visit had been a success, but he knew it was only the beginning. He had passed the first test, but the real work was just starting. Clint stood outside the dealership the next morning, staring out at the rows of cars that gleamed in the sunlight. The dust had finally settled after Bob Sanders' visit, but Clint couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part of his journey had just begun. It had been a win, yes, but only a small one in a much bigger battle. The pressure to prove that his vision for Eastwood Motors was more than just a fleeting idea weighed heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't let this one small victory lull him into complacency. As he walked through the front door, Clint was greeted by the hum of activity. The team was already hard at work, prepping cars, meeting with clients, and maintaining the showroom's energy. It was clear that morale was higher than it had been in months. But Clint knew they couldn't rest for too long. Bob Sanders had left with a somewhat impressed, albeit cautious, demeanor. But corporate's approval was only the beginning. Now, he needed to turn his renewed vision into tangible results. Grant approached him, a wide grin on his face. "Morning, Clint. How'd it go with Sanders? You look like you survived." Clint forced a smile. "Survived, yes. He's giving us some breathing room, but I know it's not over yet. We've got to keep proving ourselves, day in and day out." Grant nodded. "Well, I think the team's up for it. Everyone's been working harder, pulling together. It's the kind of energy we've needed for a while." Clint appreciated Grant's optimism, but it didn't completely ease his concerns. "Yeah, but it's going to take more than just effort. It's about maintaining momentum and making sure we're consistently delivering results. I can't afford to let anyone slack off." Grant clapped him on the back. "You're right. We'll stay focused. We're all in this together." Clint walked through the dealership floor, taking in the hustle and bustle around him. The sales staff was working with customers in a way that felt different, more genuine. Clint had noticed the change since they began implementing the new approach, but he knew it would take time before it would truly reflect in the sales figures. It wasn't just about selling cars, it was about creating lasting relationships. And that's where he was seeing the biggest shift. As he moved towards his office, Clint's phone buzzed with a text. He pulled it out, recognizing the number. It was from Rachel. "Hey Clint, I've been hearing good things about the dealership. Looks like you're turning things around. Can we talk? I've got some ideas I think you should hear." Clint's stomach fluttered. Rachel had always been a force in the business, and though they had parted ways, he had always respected her instincts. He quickly typed a reply. "Absolutely. When can you meet?" Later that afternoon, Clint met Rachel at a nearby cafe. It had been a while since they'd last seen each other, and as they exchanged pleasantries, Clint couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia for the days when they had been a team. The conversation began slowly, with Rachel asking about the dealership's progress, but soon it became clear that Rachel was here for more than just a friendly chat. "I've been talking to some people in the industry," Rachel said, leaning in slightly, her tone serious. "And there's been talk of a new competitor opening up across town. They're offering some aggressive pricing and throwing around some promises of a no-hassle, all-inclusive experience. It's going to put pressure on us." Clint felt a surge of concern. He had been so focused on internal improvements that he hadn't fully anticipated external threats like this. "I've heard rumors," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But we're already implementing a strategy that focuses on customer relationships. Price alone isn't enough to keep customers coming back." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You're right, but you can't ignore the fact that price is always a factor. People want value. If this new dealership is offering better deals, they're going to attract customers, especially if they can back up their promises." Clint sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's always something, isn't it?" "Exactly," Rachel said, nodding. "But there's a way we can fight back. I've got some ideas for a marketing campaign, one that focuses on building a unique brand identity. We need to show our customers that we're not just about the cars, we're about the experience. What makes us different? Clint sat up straighter. I'm listening. Rachel leaned in, her eyes intense. You've done a great job with the team, Clint. I can see that. But now you need to take it to the next level. If you want to beat this new competition, you need to take your customer service to an entirely new level. Think about loyalty programs, VIP events, exclusive offers that make people feel like they're part of something special. You've already got a great team, now you just need to market it. Clint absorbed her words, nodding. That's what I've been thinking. We need to solidify our place in the community and make it clear that buying a car here is about more than just getting from point A to point B. It's about the long-term relationship. Rachel smiled, her tone softening. Exactly. And you're getting there, Clint. Just remember, the competition is fierce. But you've got the right people on your side. Clint felt a renewed sense of resolve. He had been so caught up in the internal battles of rebuilding the dealership that he had neglected to see the bigger picture, the competition that was out there, always lurking, waiting for an opening. But Rachel was right. They had something special at Eastwood Motors, something the competition couldn't replicate. Now, they just had to make sure the world knew it. Over the next few days, Clint worked closely with the team to craft a new marketing strategy. They would focus on creating an identity. Eastwood Motors would be the dealership that truly cared about its customers, a place where buying a car was just the beginning of a relationship. They'd offer exclusive deals for loyal customers, host events that brought the community together, and, most importantly, deliver on their promises. Clint knew it wouldn't be easy. The competition was fierce, and the pressure to deliver was mounting. But for the first time in a long while, Clint felt like he had the right people behind him to get the job done. He couldn't afford to make mistakes anymore, but with each step forward, he felt more confident that they were on the right track. Clint woke up early the next morning, his mind already racing with ideas for the new marketing campaign. He had spent most of the previous evening brainstorming with Grant, Rachel, and a few trusted team members, all of them contributing their thoughts. The plan was coming together, but Clint knew it was going to be a gamble. The competition across town had already started to make waves, offering better deals and flashy promises. Eastwood Motors needed to stand out in a way that would resonate with the community, not just with discounts but with something more genuine, more lasting. As Clint sipped his coffee in the quiet of his office, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Rachel. Got some ideas for the VIP event. Let's meet later today. This could be a game changer. Clint smiled. Rachel had always been good at thinking outside the box, and if anyone could take the marketing campaign to the next level, it was her. He quickly typed back, agreeing to meet later in the day, and then set his phone down. There was work to be done. By 10 a.m., the dealership was buzzing with activity. Clint walked through the lot, checking in on the sales team, offering encouragement, and ensuring that everyone was fully on board with the new vision. But today wasn't just about morale, it was about preparation. Clint had a clear goal in mind. If Eastwood Motors was going to beat the competition, it would need to be more than just a dealership. It needed to become a hub of the community, a place where customers felt like they belonged. Grant was the first to approach him. "How are we looking for the big push?" he asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. "We're getting there," Clint replied, his mind still buzzing with ideas. "Rachel's got some great plans for an exclusive VIP event. If we do this right, we can build an even stronger connection with our customers. But we've got to make it special. No gimmicks, just real value." Grant nodded in agreement. "I like the sound of that. People want to feel like they're part of something, not just a transaction." Clint smiled. "Exactly. That's what we're building here, relationships, not sales." Later that afternoon, Clint met with Rachel in the back office. She was holding a stack of papers, and her eyes were alight with energy as she looked over the new event plan. "I've been thinking," Rachel began, "what if we make this VIP event more than just a one-time thing? We could offer exclusive deals, of course, but let's also create something that brings the community together. How about we host a car show? Not just any car show, but one where the community can show off their own cars. We'll invite local businesses, food trucks, music, make it an event everyone can enjoy, not just a shopping trip." Clint's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of bold move he had been hoping for. A car show? I love it. We could even tie it in with a charity auction, give back to the community. What do you think? Rachel smiled, clearly pleased with his enthusiasm. Exactly. Let's make it about more than just cars. Let's make it an experience. A celebration of the community. Clint leaned back in his chair, thinking about the impact of such an event. This could be huge. We'll need to pull in all the right resources, vendors, local businesses, maybe even a few influencers to get the word out. But if we pull this off, it'll put Eastwood Motors on the map. Rachel nodded. We'll make sure it's something people won't forget. And after the event, we can offer those VIP members exclusive perks, early access to sales, special financing options. It'll show them we value their loyalty. Clint smiled, his excitement building. This is exactly what we need. Let's do it. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Clint and Rachel worked tirelessly on planning the event. They coordinated with local businesses, reached out to influencers, and began to design promotional materials that would create buzz in the community. Clint also made sure that his team was ready for the influx of customers that would likely come in after the event. It was all part of the strategy, to create a ripple effect that would continue to generate interest long after the car show. As the event date drew closer, Clint's nerves were starting to show. He had always been a bit of a perfectionist, and the pressure to make this event a success weighed heavily on him. He knew that if the event didn't go off without a hitch, it could undo much of the progress they had made so far. But he also knew this was the only way forward. The day of the VIP event arrived, and the energy at Eastwood Motors was electric. The lot had been transformed into a mini festival, with colorful banners and food trucks lining the street. The car show was set up in the center, with rows of classic cars, vintage models, and even a few custom creations from local enthusiasts. Music played from a nearby stage, and Clint couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as he watched families and friends gather around. Grant approached Clint as he stood by the entrance, surveying the crowd. Looks like you're pulling it off, Clint. The turnout is amazing. Clint smiled, though the nerves still lingered in his stomach. I hope it holds up. This could be the game changer we need. As the event went on, it became clear that Clint's gamble was paying off. People were laughing, chatting, and enjoying themselves. The sense of community was palpable. It wasn't just about selling cars, it was about bringing people together and making them feel like part of something bigger. Customers were genuinely excited about the dealership's new approach, and Clint could see it in their faces. As the event came to a close, Clint stood near the stage, watching the crowd slowly begin to disperse. He was exhausted but elated. The event had been a success, and he knew they had made an impact. But as he looked out over the lot, he also knew that this was just the beginning. He had to keep pushing, keep innovating, and keep building relationships that would outlast any competitor. Rachel came over, a satisfied grin on her face. Well, Clint, I think you've earned a break. Clint chuckled. I wish I could take one. But this is just the start. We've got a lot of work to do to keep this momentum going. Rachel smiled. You've got a good thing going here. Just keep the focus on what matters most, your customers. They'll keep coming back if you stay true to that. Clint nodded, grateful for her support. Thanks, Rachel. I couldn't have done it without you. As the sun began to set, Clint watched the last few cars drive off the lot, his heart filled with hope for the future. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Clint felt like he was on the right path. Clint sat in his office the following Monday, still feeling the buzz from the success of the VIP event. The energy from the weekend was still fresh in his mind, but he knew better than to get too comfortable. There was always another challenge on the horizon, and just as he was beginning to feel like they were gaining momentum, the phone rang, breaking his thoughts. Clint Eastwood, he answered, trying to sound casual despite the underlying tension that had been building since the previous week. "Clint, it's Bob Sanders," the voice on the other end said. Clint's stomach tightened at the mention of his name. Bob Sanders, the corporate executive who had visited just weeks before, still loomed large in Clint's mind. "We've been hearing a lot of buzz about your event, and I've got to say, it's impressive. But we've got a new problem. A competitor's moved in down the street. They've got deep pockets and are throwing serious money at advertising. This could hurt your bottom line. They're already making noise in the market." Clint gripped the phone a little tighter. "I figured this would happen eventually," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What's their game plan?" "They're offering deals that are hard to beat, price slashing, aggressive financing options, even a no-haggle policy that's really drawing people in. They've got the marketing dollars to back it up, too." Clint felt a surge of frustration. He knew this was coming. It always did. But hearing about it from Bob made the reality feel much more immediate. "What do you expect me to do, Bob?" Clint asked, his tone sharper than he intended. "Just drop everything and start slashing prices? That's not the direction I've been taking this dealership." Bob's voice softened. "No, Clint. I know that. But we can't ignore what's happening. I'm giving you time, keep doing what you're doing, but you need to ramp up quickly. If this competitor starts pulling customers away, it's going to get ugly fast. We've got to make sure Eastwood Motors doesn't lose its spot in the market." Clint's mind raced as he hung up the phone. Another hurdle had appeared on the horizon, and this one was harder to navigate. It wasn't just about relationships anymore, it was about survival. This new competitor wasn't playing by the same rules. They were offering customers what they wanted in the most straightforward way possible, and Clint's approach, while built on trust and long-term relationships, wasn't exactly a quick fix. He needed a solution, and fast. Later that afternoon, Clint called a meeting with Grant, Rachel, and a few key members of the sales team to discuss the situation. "So, here's the deal," Clint began as he stood at the head of the table. "We've got a new competitor down the street, and they're throwing serious money into their marketing. They're undercutting our prices, and it looks like they're going all in on the no-hassle approach. The question is, how do we compete with that without sacrificing everything we've worked for?" Grant leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Price wars don't win in the long run, Clint. We've built this brand on something more valuable, trust. People come to us because they know they'll get a good deal and exceptional service. Sure, the other dealership might be undercutting us, but how long can they keep it up? You can't sell people on gimmicks forever." Rachel nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. "Grant's right. But we need to remind people why they come to us. If we try to match them on price, we'll just be in a race to the bottom. What if we double down on what makes us different? We're not just another dealership, we're a place that builds relationships. We're here for the long haul." Clint stood silently for a moment, processing their words. He was right, it wasn't just about the numbers. The new dealership might be offering deals, but it wasn't offering the personal touch that Eastwood Motors was known for. Clint didn't want to turn his business into just another price-driven operation. But he also knew he had to adapt. "We'll need to rework our messaging," Clint said, his voice steady. "We'll keep the focus on our relationships with the customers, but we'll also bring in more incentives to compete. Maybe it's time to offer some exclusive limited-time deals, but they'll come with a catch. only for those who are part of our VIP program. Grant raised his hand. I love that idea. That way, it's still about loyalty. We don't have to compete with them on price, but we do give people an incentive to choose us over the competition. And we can make sure the deals are tied to value, service, quality, and all the things that set us apart. Rachel grinned. Exactly. And we can ramp up our social media presence, too. Let's run some ads showing our community events, the customer relationships, the fact that we give back. We need to remind people that Eastwood Motors isn't just a car dealership. It's a part of their lives. Clint felt a sense of calm wash over him as the team rallied around a new plan. They didn't need to beat the competition on price alone, they just had to outwork them in every other way. It wouldn't be easy, but Clint was confident that with this team, they could make it happen. The following weeks were a blur of activity as Clint and his team pushed forward with their revised strategy. They launched targeted social media campaigns, emphasizing Eastwood Motors' commitment to community, quality, and customer satisfaction. They revamped their VIP program, offering exclusive deals to loyal customers, and ran limited-time promotions that gave people incentives without resorting to extreme discounts. The results weren't immediate, but Clint saw signs of improvement. Foot traffic at the dealership increased, and more customers signed up for the VIP program. It wasn't the same as the flashier approach the competitor was using, but Clint could see that the strategy was working. People appreciated the transparency, the honesty, and the personalized experience. But just as things seemed to be settling down, Clint received an unexpected phone call. It was Bob Sanders again. "Clint, I've got some bad news," Bob said, his voice tight. "That competitor, well, they're pulling out all the stops now. They've ramped up their efforts, and it's starting to affect us. I need you to find a way to hit back harder. We need to see results, fast. Can you do that?" Clint's heart sank. The pressure was mounting, and Bob's ultimatum only added more weight to his shoulders. He had already given everything he had, and now it seemed like the stakes were higher than ever. "Give me a week, Bob," Clint replied, his voice measured. "I'll find a way to push back." Clint stared at the numbers on his desk, the quiet hum of his office the only sound breaking through the silence. The week had been a whirlwind, and he was no closer to finding a solution to the mounting pressure from his competitor. Bob Sanders' call earlier in the day still echoed in his mind. Time was running out, and Clint had to act fast. But the question lingered, how far was he willing to go to protect Eastwood Motors? He had been pushing the team hard, trying to find ways to differentiate Eastwood Motors from the competition, but the new dealership down the street wasn't backing down. Their marketing was aggressive, their offers unbeatable, and Clint's business was feeling the heat. His loyal customers were still trickling in, but new customers seemed drawn to the flashy discounts offered by the competitor. Grant knocked on Clint's office door and entered without waiting for a response. "Hey, boss," he said, his voice laced with concern. "I've been looking over the numbers again, and things aren't getting any easier. We've got a solid base, but that new dealership is eating into our sales. We need a way to push back. Fast." Clint sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, Grant. I've been thinking about it all week. But we can't just match them on price. I refuse to turn this place into a discount store. It goes against everything we've built." "I agree," Grant said, crossing his arms. "But what if we took a different approach? We've built our reputation on being part of this community. What if we doubled down on that? Not just with events or loyalty programs, but with something bigger. We've got to make people remember why they come to us, why we're different." Clint leaned back in his chair, considering Grant's words. He had thought about many options, but this felt like the right direction. "What are you suggesting?" "We could invest in something huge," Grant continued. "Something that'll get people talking, something that'll remind them that Eastwood Motors is more than just a place to buy a car. We need to make a statement. What if we partnered with a local charity, something that means something to this community, and hosted a massive event? We can't just give away cars, we need to give back. Make it about more than just sales, make it about people. Clint's eyes lit up as he mulled over the idea. A community-driven event wasn't just about sales, it was about positioning Eastwood Motors as a pillar in the community. I like it, Clint said, the spark of inspiration now fully ignited. We create an event so big, they can't ignore us. We align ourselves with something that speaks to the people. This will be about the community, not the cars. That evening, Clint and Grant began reaching out to local organizations, charities, and businesses to find a cause that would resonate with the community. They quickly settled on a local children's hospital that was facing financial difficulties. The hospital had been a part of the community for decades, and Clint knew it would strike a chord with the people. The goal was simple: raise funds for the hospital while hosting a memorable, family-friendly event. The event would feature a car show, food trucks, live music, and games for kids. Eastwood Motors would be the primary sponsor, and Clint promised that all the proceeds from a charity auction, as well as a portion of car sales that day, would go to the hospital. The planning process was intense. Clint and Grant worked late into the night, assembling a team of volunteers, securing sponsorships, and arranging all the logistics for the event. Rachel, ever the marketing genius, worked with the social media team to create buzz around the event. This is bigger than just a sale, she told Clint as they huddled together in the marketing department. This is a chance to show people who we are and what we stand for. We're not just about selling cars, we're about giving back to the community. Clint agreed wholeheartedly. This was a chance to build something lasting, something that would make Eastwood Motors a household name not just for selling cars, but for making a difference in people's lives. The team worked tirelessly, pouring their hearts into every detail of the event. Flyers were distributed, social media ads ran, and influencers in the area started to share posts promoting the event. The word was out, and the excitement was building. The day of the event arrived, and Clint could hardly believe the turnout. The parking lot was overflowing with cars, the food trucks lined up along the street, and the sound of live music filled the air. The community came out in droves, not just to see the cars, but to support a good cause. Clint felt a sense of pride wash over him as he walked through the crowd, shaking hands, chatting with customers, and seeing families enjoying themselves. Grant approached Clint as he surveyed the lot. "It's bigger than we thought," Grant said, his voice full of awe. "This is the kind of event people won't forget." Clint nodded, his heart swelling. "I can feel it. This is exactly what we needed. Not just the sales, but the connection. This is what Eastwood Motors is about." As the day went on, Clint could see that the community was rallying around them. People were excited about the cause, and even more excited to see that Eastwood Motors was leading the charge. The charity auction raised thousands for the hospital, and people were signing up for the VIP program left and right. Clint was convinced this was the right path forward. Not only was Eastwood Motors gaining ground against the competition, but they were doing it in a way that felt true to their values. As the event wound down, Clint took a moment to step back and reflect. The competitor had been offering deals, but Eastwood Motors had given something far more valuable: a sense of belonging. People weren't just buying cars, they were joining a community, a movement that was making a tangible impact on their lives. But Clint knew that this wasn't the end. The competition wouldn't go away, and there would always be new challenges. He needed to keep pushing, keep innovating, and keep showing people that Eastwood Motors wasn't just a dealership. It was a part of their lives. The weeks following the charity event were a whirlwind of success for Eastwood Motors. Clint had never seen the dealership so alive. The event had been a smash hit, and the community's response was overwhelming. The hospital had received the financial support it desperately needed, and Eastwood Motors had positioned itself as not just a car dealership, but a pillar of the community. But Clint knew better than to get too comfortable. As the saying goes, success breeds complacency, and Clint was determined to avoid that trap. He kept the pedal to the metal, ensuring that the team remained focused, constantly engaging with the community and driving loyalty among the customers who were now returning in droves. However, just when it seemed that Eastwood Motors was turning the corner and solidifying its spot in the market, Clint received a phone call that would shake everything he had worked for. It was Bob Sanders. "Clint, I need you to sit down for this," Bob's voice crackled through the phone, and Clint could hear the tension in it. "I just got word from corporate. That competitor you've been facing down. They've made a bold move. They've acquired another dealership, one that's even bigger than yours. They're expanding rapidly, and now they've got more resources than ever." Clint's stomach dropped. The news felt like a punch to the gut. After everything he had done, everything his team had worked so hard to build, here was a new threat that was more powerful, more established, and now more dangerous than ever. "What does this mean for us?" Clint asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though the weight of the situation was heavy in his chest. Bob's voice softened. "It means they're coming after your customers with everything they've got. It's not just price cuts anymore. They've got a bigger inventory, a wider selection, and more aggressive financing. They're using all the tricks in the book. I'm afraid you're going to see a shift in the market, and it's going to be tough to compete." Clint could feel the ground shifting beneath him. The market was already tough, but now it was about to get a whole lot tougher. The competitor wasn't just a nuisance anymore, they were a serious contender, and Clint had to figure out how to respond. Later that day, Clint called an emergency meeting with the leadership team. The vibe in the room was noticeably different from their previous meetings. There was no more talk of celebration, no more chatter about past victories. Now, the focus was entirely on the future, and the threat that was looming over them. "Listen up," Clint began, his tone firm but with a hint of exhaustion. "We've done great work with the charity event, but it's clear now that our competitors aren't just playing around. They've made a major move, and if we're not careful, it's going to undo everything we've worked for." Rachel, always the strategist, leaned forward. "What are we up against here? How serious is this?" "They've acquired another dealership, one that gives them access to more cars, more space, more options. They're getting more aggressive with financing, and they've got a marketing budget that's almost unlimited. They're not just offering cars, they're offering the world to these customers." Grant shook his head. "That's a game changer. We can't match them dollar for dollar. We don't have that kind of leverage." Clint nodded, acknowledging the truth in Grant's words. "I agree. We're not going to beat them at their own game. But we've built a foundation on trust, on relationships, and on being part of this community. We need to keep focusing on what makes us different. That's our strength." "But it's not enough anymore," Rachel countered. "If people are getting deals from them that we can't compete with, our customers might start to drift away. We need to take action, and fast." Clint rubbed his chin, deep in thought. The solution wasn't clear yet, but something was starting to form in his mind. They needed to do more than just rely on their reputation, they needed to push the envelope, make a statement that couldn't be ignored. The question was how. The next few days were spent brainstorming, analyzing the competitors' moves, and trying to stay one step ahead. Clint wanted to remain true to the values that had made Eastwood Motors successful, but he also needed to be more proactive. After several intense meetings with his leadership team, Clint came up with a plan, a bold one. "I've been thinking," Clint said to the group, as they gathered in his office. "The other dealership might have the numbers and the offers, but we have something they'll never have, the loyalty of this community. We've spent years building relationships with our customers, and it's time to remind them why they came to us in the first place. But we're not going to do it quietly. We're going to make a splash." "What's the plan?" Grant asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. Clint leaned forward, his eyes filled with determination. "We're going to host the biggest sales event this dealership has ever seen. But instead of just selling cars, we'll turn it into a massive celebration of everything that makes us special, our community. We'll feature local businesses, local artists, and of course, we'll tie in a charity component, just like we did last time. But this time, we'll have a bigger, better presence, and we're going to put our competitor on notice. Rachel nodded. I like it. We'll highlight everything we do differently and show people that we're not just selling cars, we're offering an experience. This isn't about price, it's about community, quality, and trust. Clint smiled, relieved that the team was on board. Exactly. We're going to create an event that's not just a sale, it's going to be an experience people won't forget. And we'll use every marketing tool at our disposal. Social media, influencers, even a live stream of the event for people who can't make it in person. Let's make some noise. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. Clint and his team worked tirelessly, reaching out to local businesses, booking entertainment, and securing sponsorships. They poured everything into making the event something unforgettable, and Clint could feel the energy building. The whole team believed in this approach. They weren't just selling cars, they were selling an experience, a reason to believe in Eastwood Motors. And then, just as everything was coming together, Clint received another surprise. His competitor, the one who had acquired the other dealership, had made a major move. They were holding their own mega sale at the exact same time as Clint's event. It was an aggressive move, meant to steal Eastwood Motors' thunder, and Clint could see exactly what they were trying to do. But this time, Clint didn't flinch. If anything, he felt more determined than ever. They want to play hardball. Clint muttered under his breath, a steely glint in his eye. Then let's show them what real community looks like. The day of the showdown had finally arrived. Clint stood in front of Eastwood Motors, looking at the lot full of cars, tents, and people milling about. The sun was shining, but there was a storm brewing. This wasn't just a sales event. This was the culmination of everything he had fought for, and the moment would define the future of Eastwood Motors. For weeks, Clint and his team had worked relentlessly to pull off the event of the year. But as he looked around, his mind couldn't help but go back to the phone call he had received earlier in the week. His competitor, who had been increasing their presence and trying to outshine Eastwood Motors, had scheduled their mega sale at the same time. They were ready for a fight, but Clint was determined not to let it faze him. This was more than just a sale, it was a statement. It was about Eastwood Motors, the people who had supported them, and the community they had worked so hard to build. Grant walked up to Clint, clapping him on the back. You did it, boss. Look at this crowd. They're not just here for cars, they're here for us. We've made an impact. Clint nodded, watching as families walked past the food trucks, children laughing as they played games, and people chatting about the charity that had benefited from their earlier efforts. The atmosphere was electric. People weren't just there to buy cars, they were there because Eastwood Motors was a part of their community. Clint felt the weight of the moment. This was his chance to show his competitors that they could never take that away. As the day went on, the crowd continued to grow, far surpassing Clint's expectations. Local businesses that had sponsored the event were packed with customers, and the charity auction was bringing in more money than Clint could have ever hoped for. The line of people eager to see what Eastwood Motors had to offer seemed endless. And then, just as Clint thought the day couldn't get any better, he saw them, the competitors. Their mega sale was in full swing across town, but their lot was nearly empty. Clint couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between their aggressive discounts and Eastwood Motors' community-first approach. The difference was clear, the people were here for more than just a deal, they were here because they believed in what Eastwood Motors represented. Bob Sanders had been right, this event had become more than just a contest of cars and prices. It was a battle of values. Clint felt the tension rise in his chest. As the day wore on, he noticed a few familiar faces from the competitor's dealership walking toward him, clearly curious about the event. Clint, one of them called out, waving him over. He recognized the man, Dave, the sales manager from the rival dealership. Clint offered a polite smile as he walked toward him. "Dave. What brings you over here?" Clint asked, trying to keep things friendly, though he could feel the underlying tension. "We saw what you were doing here, and I gotta admit, this is impressive." "You really know how to make a statement," Dave said, his tone surprisingly sincere. Clint chuckled, not entirely buying the compliment but appreciating the gesture nonetheless. "Thanks. We're trying to do something special. It's not just about selling cars, it's about being part of this community." Dave nodded. "Well, I can see that. I have to admit, our mega sale isn't pulling the crowd we expected. I think it's because people can see through the gimmicks. They want something more." Clint's heart swelled with pride. This was exactly what he had hoped for. It wasn't just about cars, it was about creating relationships, building trust, and showing that Eastwood Motors was more than just a place to buy a car. It was a place that cared about its community and its customers. "Well," Clint said with a grin, "if you ever want to join the winning team, you know where to find us." Dave laughed, shaking his head. "I might just take you up on that." As the event came to a close, Clint couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Not only had Eastwood Motors come out on top in the battle for customers, but they had done so by staying true to their values. The competitors' mega sale had fizzled, and Eastwood Motors had proven that there was more to a successful business than just slashing prices. The community had rallied behind them, and it was clear that their loyalty was unwavering. Later that evening, Clint stood at the front of the dealership, looking at the final tally for the day. The numbers were through the roof. Not only had they exceeded their sales goals, but they had raised more money for the hospital than he ever thought possible. Grant approached, a big smile on his face. "We did it, Clint. We've got people asking about future events already. This isn't just a one-time thing, it's a movement." Clint nodded, his eyes shining with excitement. "This is just the beginning, Grant. We've shown people what we're made of. It's not about the cars or the competition, it's about what we stand for. And that's something no one can take away from us." As Clint looked out over the dealership, surrounded by his team and the satisfied customers, he realized that this was more than just a business. It was a legacy. Eastwood Motors had become a symbol of what could be accomplished when people work together for something greater than themselves. The community had embraced them, and now Clint knew that they were unstoppable. As the night settled in, Clint turned to his team, pride in his voice. "We've come a long way. But this is just the start of what we can do together." And with that, Clint Eastwood stood tall, knowing that the future of Eastwood Motors had never looked brighter. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?